على من بعث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم ألهمنا رشدنا ووفقنا بما تحب وترضى. Welcome, brothers and sisters, as we continue in our discussion on the subject of diseases and plagues in a time period for which every one of us is facing something particular. It could be a reduction in wealth, it could be a reduction in health, it could be stress, it could be fear, it could be many things. But one thing is certain, every one of us is affected by it by some form of angle. Me personally, I have had a few secondary cousins pass away from the virus. I have had friends and family have a reduction in their livelihood, among other things as well. So the point is, this is something very real. The circumstance we are facing in this present time of history, it is something very real. It is something serious. And it is something that every one of us in some form or another is facing a level of stress. So we pray that in these particular lectures, we get an opportunity to reflect upon certain things that can help us get through something that is abnormal to us, but relatively common in human history. Which brings us to our subject today. Our subject today is actually looking to historical references, narrations, diaries about their experiences with plagues, with the concept of infectious disease, with the concept of epidemics, with the concept of pestilence, among others as well, and what they left behind in their diaries for all of us to look back to. Today's particular discussion will focus on, interesting enough, if you haven't noticed, the changes in our life choices, the changes in the way we think, and the changes in the way we interact. I believe what, God willing, we will present today is going to be straightforward, but it definitely has an importance for every one of us to reflect over. There's a scholar in Islamic history, Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar Asqalani, he referred to. And in this regard, he discusses the subject beneath a chapter title, في بعض ما قيل في وصف الطاعون. He discusses this particular scholar in a chapter subcategory that reflects upon what it has been said, what has been said historically in diaries as lessons for people to reflect over, revolving around diseases, death, and sicknesses. In his reference, he speaks of a scholar by the name of Zane Adam ibn Wardi. And this particular scholar, he lived around the 7th century. Maybe if you do not know this, as we have said in other lectures, diseases, plagues, sicknesses, pestilence, afflicting large portions of human society has occurred several times throughout human history. And interesting enough, it has affected people of all races. It has affected people of all genres, all races, all nationalities, and also, as this is a theological discussion, people of all faith-based approaches. And as a result, no one is exempt with regard to this. In Islamic history, in various populaces, it has happened on numerous occasions. And interesting enough, during those periods, as we have said, it may have eventually reached these populations by outside geographical locations. As a result, people from other faith groups had faced it, went through the process, and are and or were going through the difficulties, and sooner or later, it spread to populations that were surrounded by many Muslims. With that in mind, the scholar Mudaffar ibn al-Wardi, rahimahullah ta'ala, Zain ad-Din, he had left behind for our personal benefits a diary for every one of us to think over. In this section of the diary, what he wrote, in what he has seen with regard to pestilences and diseases and epidemics and plagues, experiences, and how human beings from all types of life have changed their ways. So he reflects upon the characteristics of people and their character prior to epidemics and during epidemics, comparing the circumstance between the two. And interesting enough, if you haven't noticed this, every one of us has changed something in their life. طوعاً أو كرها, freely or due to the compulsory effects of the society we are currently living in and what it is currently facing. Some of those changes are positive, some of those changes are negative. Let's stop and think of some of the positives with regard to this. So Mudaffar rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions وَمِن فَوَائِدِهِ تَقْصِيرُ الْآمَالِ, from the benefits, from the positive thought, from the optimistic perspective in how people have changed positively during epidemics is the concept and reflection upon taqsir al-amal. And amal is an interesting statement. It is in reference to the realization that actually there is an end to life, that life isn't infinite, that life isn't everlasting. This particular stage as human beings that every one of us who is listening to this live broadcast is facing will not continue forever. And this is, he argues, through anthropological observation, how people have changed in their mindset. When the circumstance gets very, very serious, people start to reflect upon things, and one of those things he is arguing is the realization that life is actually pretty short. You look around and see, if you haven't seen how many people have passed away from the epidemics as human beings. وَتَحْسِينُ الْأَعْمَالِ, and they grow, and their mannerism, and their characteristic, and the choices they make become better. The evil habits they chose of the past, they change. وَالْيَقَظَةُ مِنَ الْغَفْلَةِ, and they ponder over things that are far more important. Their souls or their mindset may have been in a state of unknowingness, in a state of dread, in a state of death. But in times of reflection, in the times of seclusion, it gives an opportunity, as Ibn Ata'ullah he said, for an individual to expand tremendously through contemplation. وَتَزَوَّدُوا لِلرِّحْلَةِ, and they prepare through their choices they make, through the actions they choose, through the sincerity, their state of their heart, changing choices and preparing for a rihla. And a rihla, if we were to translate it, as many of us here knows when we use the term in Arabic rihla to mean a travel, for example, an adventure of some sort. In this regard, the traveling in reference is that which is to come, the passing and swooning away of an individual's life. فَهَذَا يُوَصِّي بِأَوْلَادِهِ. So Mudaffar al-Din, he continues describing the changes in people's lives, the options they have made, the choices they have made. And here he's reflecting upon the optimistic changes human beings have done during and choose to do once they've given the chance to reflect upon the realities and circumstances and effects of what an epidemic brings about. So he describes and continues to say from the 7th century Hijri, فَهَذَا, about 700 years ago, فَهَذَا يُوَصِّي بِأَوْلَادِهِ. In this state, men and women begin to bequeath important lessons for their children. In case, God forbid, it is their time to pass and they leave their children behind without benefiting from the knowledge and footsteps and preparations for things to come when their father and or mother swoon away. وَهَذَا يُوَدِّعُ إِخْوَانَهُ. And they continue with regard to this. These individuals, some of which go about and they start to provide their farewells to their friends, to their brothers, to their sisters, to their parents, in fear and preparation that it is quite possibly they have been afflicted or will be afflicted by a sickness that many of their generation have passed away from. I want us just to stop for a second before we continue and remember, Mudaffaruddin, this scholar, is talking about the benefits in the changes people choose to make during these times of pestilence 700 years ago. And that among the benefits he had talked about is once they start to reflect about the reality that actually there is a death and time is temporarily. And as a result, there are things that are more important. Some of the things they do as they prepare for the travels and embarking on their passages is the care for their parents, spending time with their parents, the care for their children, spending time in preparing their children. And this is very interesting because if you haven't noticed this, nowadays we are spending more time with our parents, we are spending more time with our children, we are spending more time with our spouses, we are spending more time with our brothers and sisters. The reality is, interesting enough, it is definitely an opportunity to kindle something which may have not or may have been forgotten because of our life choices and not being around to take and utilize the opportunities to spend and reflect and take and make memories with these people we love. فَهَذَا يُوَصِّي بِأَوْلَادِهِ وَهَذَا يُوَدِّعُ إِخْوَانَهُ. So he says, this individual among the people, he starts to draw closer to his children and prepare them and teach them important lessons and guide them and bequeath the inheritance, for example. وَهَذَا يُوَدِّعُ إِخْوَانَهُ. And the other, he starts to give his farewell greetings, the last vouchers and words to people he loved, of his brothers and his sisters. وَهَذَا يُهَيِّئْ إِشْغَالَهُ. And this other individual chooses to start to manifest good actions. Okay? He starts to produce what is required of him to produce. And what's interesting about this particular element from the diary that he mentions in narrative is, many of us might know this, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, even if you are able to, even if you are able to plant a seed of vegetation that has the potential to grow and benefit human beings and animals, and even if it is just for a small, short period of time before the hour elapses, do so. Even if you are about to pass away, do so. Even if you know for certain, for example, this concept in Islamic theology, it believes among the other Abrahamic faiths that there is a day of judgment, is drawing near and you have the opportunity to do so, even if you know it's coming, to do so. And the interesting thing about this particular statement, it shows that even if impending danger is coming, even if a pending end is coming, in the mindset of a person, in husnul dhann billah, the respective thoughts and good beliefs and perspectives of God, a person still needs to work to produce the benefits that they can leave behind for others to bear fruit from. And this is undoubtedly one of the very important lessons that are taught in Islamic mannerism. وَهَذَا يُهَيِّئْ إِشْغَالَهُ وَهَذَا يُجَهِّزْ أَكْفَانَهُ. And among the people are people who begin to, as we have said earlier, realizing that in times of epidemic and sickness and death, etc., there is actually an end. And in that preparation, what happens is a person begins to ponder over it, and it starts to affect the way they think when it reaches great extremes. And as a result, what they do is they prepare their shrouds, their grave clothings, among other things, in case it is their time to swoon away. Now, this can be taken literally, but one thing is very much important here, is to take it metaphorically. So if an individual chooses, يجهز إكفانه, if a person chooses, as Muzaffar is mentioning here, about its preparation, as a person swoons and draws nearer to death, that they prepare their shrouds and their coffins for that particular departure, even more so of that which is important are your final wishes, the final actions you choose. If you know an impending end is drawing near, how would you live? What would you do? What would you choose to do? What would you choose to pardon? What would become important to you? Those things, obviously, that were once important are not important anymore, because you know they're of no benefit for and with and during the time you move on to the next travels. وَهَذَا يُصَالِحْ أَعْدَاءَهُ. And interesting enough, this particular scholar in his references is saying people during these times, because of the severity and seriousness and something that takes the attention of the mind and soul, and they begin to ponder over such things, petty things in our lives, the petty things, the small, not very important things, become secondary. And he is saying here, it's interesting because وَهَذَا يُصَالِحْ أَعْدَاءَهُ, that a person who's in animosity with someone, say there are two armies, for example, and they are in war, but something outside of the realm between these particular stages, between the two, the exchanges, causes them to make peace because they know something before them is ever more serious. And in the micro level, when a person has petty arguments and ill will towards one another in the worldly matter, if it's business or if it's a neighborly thing or a friend thing or jealousy, etc., you make peace because you know that is secondary. That is not important in our time and frame. There is something more important that takes away the thought and it makes one prepare for. For those of us tuning in a little later, we are talking about the diary, one might say, in our present context, of the written works of a scholar from the 7th century, 8th century Hijri calendar by the name of Zane Muzaffar. Okay, and he is writing about the effects upon the communities and societies and human beings with regard to the way they think, their manners, and the choices they make in connection to their actions during times of epidemic, during times of a plague, during times of a pestilence. He lived in a far greater, as of now, in comparison, a more severe sickness that afflicted tremendously and had very harsh repercussions. It is true in our time, unfortunately, there is quite a bit of hardship. We pray it doesn't reach the pinnacles of those plagues of the past, and that is what he's reflecting upon. And in here, he's talking about how the benefits on one end manifest themselves. And they very much manifest themselves in the psychology, in the philosophical choices and beliefs a person makes. And as a result, it stems to the actions. As a result, أَلَا إِنَّ فِي الْجَسَدِ مُضْغَةً. Many of us know this tradition. If the heart is well, then the limbs will follow. وَهَذَا يُلَاطِفْ جِيرَانَهُ. So before that, he says, وَهَذَا يُصَالِحْ أَعْدَاءَهُ وَهَذَا يُلَاطِفْ جِيرَانَهُ. Such individuals during this time, they make peace with their enemies. They know something more serious is at hand. And as a result, it's time to swoon these things away, these petty things, and face the realities of something greater. We are in it together. وَهَذَا يُلَاطِفْ جِيرَانَهُ. And others, during this time, they finally make the choice to become well acquainted, well mannered, dutiful, helpful, loving to their neighbors. And this is tremendous, and this is a very powerful statement. And those of us that have good hearts, in his reflections, as you can see over 700 years ago, and we can see it now, during these times, how these good-hearted individuals have chosen to take an extra step to help their neighbors. And individuals who maybe prior to the advent of these difficulties we are facing in society now chose not to care too much about their neighbors, they finally start to, hopefully, if they are good-hearted, do so. وَهَذَا يُلَاطِفْ جِيرَانَهُ وَهَذَا يُوَسِّعْ إِنْفَاقَهُ. And others during this time, they start to, if the Almighty has given them wealth, they begin to share it with others. They begin to give in their charities. They begin to support others and those that are particularly in need. وَهَذَا يُحَادٍ مِنْ خَانَهُ. And this particular aspect and portion of the diary that he mentions of the changes, the positive choices and changes people make in times of pestilence and plagues and diseases, where يُحَادٍ مِنْ خَانَهُ is a statement where he is arguing that we have faced people undoubtedly who have proven treacherous, maybe to a promise, okay, maybe to a promise between them, maybe to a security between people, a transaction between people. But the interesting thing is that during this particular time, what some people do and some of the positive choices people make and choose to change from their old habits is these individuals who prove treacherous, because of the seriousness of the circumstance, what they choose to do instead is they refer, right? They start to retire. They start to retire away from the individual who maybe they prove treacherous to them. And they retire away from that because they're facing something more important. They start to care less about these things. And with regard to that, what happens is some people, for example, they start to say, let's say a person stole wealth from you. They start to say during these times, it's charity. Oh Allah, make it charity in this individual on my behalf. On his behalf, you are the judge, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what happens is they retire it and they leave it to the Almighty, that sooner or later everyone will meet the Almighty. But if you remember earlier, one of the things Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar, he advised us to do during these times, if you have wronged anybody, to return back those rights that maybe you have taken from someone. If it is wealth, if it is a loan, if you stole something, whatever it may be, to return it back to the people at hand. وَهَذَا يُحَبِّسْ أَمْلَاكَهُ. And during these times, what happens is people start to become a little bit more wiser about imlakahu. And imlak here is referring to their sustenance that they have. Okay, and what happens is maybe a person prior to these advents is very much wasteful. So they waste their wealth and they waste what they have and they waste the bounties they have. They are careless, for example. But what happens, they start to realize that their resources are quite a bit limited. And if they're limited, people become a little bit more wise-based. The interesting thing, it can become two ways. Because of the fear of their limited amount of material wealth being available, people become overly aggressive. And sometimes, unfortunately, you see that. And we might be able to refer to the chaos that incurred with regard to toilet paper, for example. Whereas other people, they're angelic. Do you see they are calm, they are collected. What they do and understand and what they have, they're flexible with. They're wise about, they don't waste it. They begin to appreciate, especially the things they have. وَهَذَا يُحَرِّرُ غِلْمَانُهُ. And this is an interesting thing. He says that from the positive changes people make in society during these times, with a positive reflection, is that people who, for example, in the past, 1,000 years ago, for example, we know in certain areas there was a discussion in connection to the slave discussion. As things draw nearer, knowing that Islam has abolished slavery and talked about the tremendous deed for freeing slaves, for example, and that it is considered some of the greatest actions a person can do. And there are many examples of that in our zakah as we give it, among other things as well. He says here that people begin to do so if, again, they choose and want to become better during these times. وَهَذَا يُغَيِّرُ أَخْلَاقَهُ. Many people during these times, they begin to change their manners. Here we are hoping it is in a positive light. How are we doing so, and why are we doing so? If you were to just hear the statement, you could say it goes both ways. But in connection to the writer's approach, at the beginning he said, وَمِنْ فَوَائِدِهِ تَقْصِيرُ الْآمَالِ. He is starting this particular diary reflecting upon the benefits that occur and concur when a person is optimistic, philosophically, theologically, and action-based publicly, when an epidemic occurs or a pestilence occur, and that death actually starts to draw a little bit more nearer, it becomes serious, and that society begins to be affected quite a bit by these difficulties. In his argumentation, he starts to reflect upon the benefits in people's morality. And he's talking about those people who choose to change, and he is reflecting upon, again, people who have an inclination towards the God consciousness. And that's the interesting thing about God consciousness and belief in God, is that it can always stem a change in a person's soul. وهذا يحبس أملاكه وهذا يحرر غلمانه وهذا يغير أخلاقه. And others during this time, they start to change their manners. And many of us know that some of the most angelic individuals in the human race, Islam teaches, is those and are those individuals that are of best manners. وَهَذَا يُعَيِّدْ مِيزَانَهُ. And as for the last statement he mentions in this particular poetic diary he writes, he essentially says that there is a mizan, and a mizan is like a scale. And the word yu'ayyir is a term that can refer to like to rebuke something. He is saying that a person starts to reflect upon the actions they made in the past. If you see this quite a bit in people, for example, that are afflicted by a difficulty, maybe a sickness, and this sickness is severe and it is serious and it can reach the stage of, it basically shows the mortality of human beings, etc. A person begins to reflect upon the choices they made in life. And you see this quite a bit, arguably, in people of old age as death draws nearer and nearer. And that is why you find philosophical arguments, how even people who maybe during their youth didn't care too much about the travels to come when it comes to theology. We know when you pass, you meet the Almighty, and you're held accountable for your choices. But as they get older and older and their morbidity becomes more and more real, their health reduces, their age reduces, whatever it is, these reflections start to kick in. So they start to rebuke, they start to denounce the choices they made in the past, and they regret some of those choices. And as a result, what it does is it leads to wishing maybe they never did that before. And that actually is the initial start in Islamic theology for the change and bounty and purity of the soul. And this is why, arguably, some of the most profound statements in Islam and arguable statements in Islam is of people who regretted the choices they make, and they had the opportunity to do so, and as a result, during that time, they wish they never did, and they pray for the forgiveness that they may have concurred because of the actions they chose. Mudaffaruddin, he continues to state, فإن كان هذا الوباء قد سبى وقد كان يرسل طوفانه فلا عاصم اليوم من أمره سوى رحمة الله سبحانه. He argues that the waba and the saba, these particular terms, and the tufan, the epidemic, the pestilence, things of the past, of the ta'un, for example, the plague, the infectious diseases, the tufan, these severe storms and floods that affected humanity, whatever it may be, these things that come and go, and as they have continuously, every generation affected a society of some sort, in the end, he argues, the human being should embark in seeking what protects them, but they know for a fact that things are out of their hands. As a result, as you embark in trying to seek a change and cure, whatever it may be, and protection, know for certain that in Islamic theology, God is living, He's aware, He listens, and is able. And as a result, فَلَا عَاصِمَ الْيَوْمَ مِنْ أَمْرِهِ سِوَى رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ سُبْحَانَهُ. In the end protection on these days of severity only comes by the intervention of the Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا مَنَعَنَا الْفِرَارُ مِنْهُ إِلَّا التَّمَسُّكْ بِالْحَدِيثِ. He continues saying, we are facing these pessimists during our time, and this is 700 years ago. And what has prevented me from running away from the area I live in, because it's been affected and it has the plague, is the prophetic advice of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to control it. And that control is that if you are afflicted and you are in a certain area, then to be patient. And if it so is written that you swoon away during this time, you are considered an angelic being because of your sacrifice. If you are to embark and traverse and move around and you do so, it is very probable that you start to spread the sickness around. But the interesting thing is this prophetic tradition he is saying that prevented me from leaving the area that I am in, that is afflicted by such a tremendous sickness and plague, and many people are swooning and are in sickness, is this prophetic tradition. Obviously, as you can see, Islam provides tremendous importance on the subject of sacrifice, on the subject of care for your neighbor, on the subject of keeping the well-being of society, of your generation, and for the generation to come. And these are part of the Dururatul Khams, the 5 essential teachings and foundations of what Islam's goals are. He continues to say, as we draw near to the end of this particular section of his diary, فَقُمْ بِنَا نَسْتَغِيث وَمَا مَنَعَنَا الْفِرَارُ مِنْهُ إِلَّا التَّمَسُّكْ بِالْحَدِيثِ فَقُمْ بِنَا نَسْتَغِيث إِلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فِي رَفْعِهِ فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ مُغِيثٌ اللهم إنا ندعوك بأفضل ما دعاك به الداعون أن ترفع عنا الوباء والطاعون لا نلتجئ في رفعه إلا إليك ولا نعول في العافية منها إلا عليك نعوذ بك يا رب الفلق من الضرب بهذه العصا ونسألك رحمتك سبحانك وتعالى التي وسعت كل شيء فهي أوسع من ذنوبنا ولو كانت عدد الرمل بالعصا. He goes on to say, and as a result, as we have stopped and reflected upon the realities of this particular thing, let us stand in sincerity in our supplications and pray to the Almighty. In our supplications, praying to the Almighty, asking the Almighty with the most beautiful words and terms to remove the waba and ta'un, the pestilence and infectious disease and epidemic and plague that is facing us. We, as he continues manifestly, do not turn to anyone when it comes to supplication as a form of worship, except to you, this monotheistic being who is living and hearing. وَلَا نُعَوِّلْ فِي الْعَافِيَةِ مِنْهُمَا إِلَّا عَلَيْكَ. And we do not essentially depend on the mercy from such things except through you. نَعُوذُ بِكَ يَا رَبِّ الْفَلَقِ. We seek refuge in you, the Lord of daybreak, from the hardships we are facing, and from this, as if it is a stick that is hitting us. وَنَسْأَلَكَ رَحْمَتُكَ الَّتِي وَسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. And we ask the mercy of yours, which envelops all matter, all things, from the mistakes we have made, even if our mistakes and faults and sins, which is part of the attribute of the human being, is عَدَدَ الرَّمْلِ وَالْحَصَى, even if it reaches the amount of individual pebbles in the sand or pebbles in the rocks, regardless of the amount, whatever it may be, our belief in you is that your mercy and forgiveness is greater than such things. Brothers and sisters, until we meet again, Guidance College is here with professors and doctors and spiritualists looking to benefit society, looking to benefit our souls, looking to benefit our knowledge through the concept of education and a moralistic perspective, Take care. Until we meet again, the Almighty knows best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.